Okay. All right, guys, you should be hearing me. You should be hearing me soon. We're going to be talking about just a quick reminder that blacks are still out of control. It's terrible. And I got some other news that I want to talk about for you guys. It should be fun. You should have a good time.
1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, it's the Hake Report. The Hake Report. La la la. Oh, it's the Hake Report. The Hake Report. La la la.
Happy Mother's Day!
Oh, it's the Hake Report. The Hake Report. La la la. Oh, it's the Hake Report. The Hake Report. La la la.
Hey guys, I'm James Hake of the Hake Report. It is Sunday, May 12th, 2019, and it is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to everybody. Well, all the mothers, all the mamas. 2019, mid-May already, practically, and Mother's Day. Amazing. And I just thought it would be a good idea just to remind people and mention and point out, because we covered a few different interesting stories on the Jesse Lee Peterson show this past week, that I just wanted to just bring all together a little bit and point out that blacks are still out of control. It's bad. It's really bad. And a lot of blacks like to make excuses and point to whites. Oh, look at child molesters. Oh, mass shooters. But they're not really looking at themselves. And it's a very all too common mistake not to look at yourself and start to judge other people who are talking and saying stuff that you don't really like to hear. And I have some news about something that happened to a friend of ours here at Bond, a friend of Jesse's, a friend of mine, I kind of say, even though not a personal friend. There was this story of this young conservative man who had an interview with somebody overseas, and he just kind of overreacted to it and ended up making a mistake, and he admitted that he made a mistake. A lot of people hate this person because this person was not that into Trump. And then there's a whole lot of people on the left who hate him because he's conservative and very much a battler for conservatism, so-called. And I also have some funny stories about the hashtag #MeToo people. These feminists are really nasty, and they want to institute a thing where they don't have sex anymore until they get their rights back, so-called rights, reproductive rights. Dumb. Just in time for Mother's Day, right? These women are just out of control. It's so pathetic. And then also I wanted to talk about a little bit, touch on, hopefully, these sinning Christians. Can you be a Christian and still sin? I think you can, but you'll be like the fake kind of Christian. The one that's not really a real, genuine, full-on, all-out Christian. The hypocrites. I think most Christians and the whole rest of the world are on the wide road that kind of leads to destruction, because still sinning, still accepting it, and still making excuses and just living that way. It's terrible. And meanwhile, they're judging people that are saying biblical things. People like Jesse Lee Peterson, and there's some street preachers out there who say you do not sin once you're born again. The Bible says it, but then they act like Jesse's the heretic. I covered this last week, but it has been an ongoing thing. The people in my comment section on YouTube specifically just act like they didn't even comprehend the scripture that I gave them. I gave them Bible verses that backed up what Jesse said about once you're born again of God, you cannot sin. And they act like they didn't understand it. That you have to read in context and stupid stuff like that. And then they just read something that doesn't come out and say that you still sin after being born again, and then assume that that's what it means. Like stuff from Paul, who said, oh, it's not I who do it, but sin living in me who does it, that does it. And that's a lot of people that hate Paul, by the way. They think that he was anti-Christ and stuff like that. I don't really see it that way. I liked Paul's writings. I don't see him as a fake. And so I want to talk a little bit about all that stuff. But quick stories. These were kind of trending news that was on my mind. This guy who's a friend of ours, Ben Shapiro, young, early 30s, conservative guy, very outspoken, fast talking, and he most of the fast talking that he does is factual stuff. Sometimes he's misjudged Trump in the past. For example, he made a bet with Jesse Lee Peterson that Trump was not going to win. And so now he owes Jesse Lee Peterson lunch. But he went on BBC, which is a British state news, basically. State-run news, I think. And pretty liberal, but the person who was interviewing him actually, from what I've heard, is actually kind of conservative. But the way that these Brits do these interviews is they will ask like the devil's advocate questions, asking them the questions that their opposition would ask. And Ben misread what he was saying. For example, the man asked, you're for people being civil, but it seems like you have these barbaric laws that are coming through on the conservative side against abortion, women going to jail for having miscarriages, which I don't know where he's getting that information, but he's giving the side of the liberals for Ben to answer. And then Ben calls him out on calling it barbaric. Anti-abortion law is barbaric because abortion is barbaric, not anti-abortion. But anyways, Ben calls him out on that and thinks that he's a leftist based on that phrasing. And the man's like, that's ridiculous. If you knew anything about me, you'd know that that's ridiculous. So the guy handled himself very well, and Ben misjudged the person. And this is so common. You'll see it all the times if you're paying attention to yourself or other people in conversations. If you listen to Jesse's show, you'll hear people reacting wrongly to the way that he questions them. It is so common. They'll be like, oh, you're judging me. They'll hear a word that triggers them, and then they'll make a false judgment about it. And like I said, Ben admitted that he made a mistake. He said, this person won. I don't remember the name of the guy, something O'Neill or something like that. But he said, this guy won and I lost. And so it's just, there was another thing where he was handling all the questions pretty well once he answered them. There was one where he talked about how the Palestinians or Muslims or Middle Easterners, whatever, just like to bomb crap and whatever, leave sewage in the street, something like that, just where it's very dirty. And that's kind of true. It was like Jesse described when he visited Israel. The Palestinian side or the Muslims or whatever were the complainers, and they let their own homes, own neighborhoods become kind of ghetto. Meanwhile, they're complaining about the people in Israel or the Jews who had their stuff pretty nice. And it's kind of like how the blacks complain about the whites in this country or the Asians in this country. They're the neighborhoods of the whites and the Asians. Although there's some inner turmoil among their families and lives, they're not living right anymore for the most part. They're still maintaining being fairly law-abiding for the most part still. It's getting a little worse now. A lot of drug use, a lot of death. More and more thuggery because the families are falling apart, even among whites and to a lesser extent Asians. The Asians are pretty liberal anyways. But anyways, like the blacks and the Hispanics are complaining about the whites and to a lesser extent the Asians in the same way that the Palestinians are complaining about the Jews in Israel. And Ben kind of, Ben is very, I guess he's kind of politically correct in a sense, in that he acknowledges that it's whatever, that it's doesn't sound that nice. But he was answering the questions, but then he kind of lost patience with the guy. And it's so common to run into that situation. And I encourage the people who are even halfway on Ben's side in terms of conservatism, opposing the left, not to join in on the hate against him, because this guy made a mistake that a whole lot of us make mistakes in this very same thing, even in our personal lives. And just because he did it on the public stage, you shouldn't be judging him on it. And you're joining in with people like Alyssa Milano. And Alyssa Milano is one of the most disgusting women that you can imagine, outwardly so, openly so. There's a lot of, women who act like they're nice and men who act like they're nice, and then underneath the surface, they're really mean and evil. Well, this woman is just openly evil, especially towards decent people. So she tweeted about this incident, and I have her tweet. She compared Ben Shapiro, called him whiny, and compared him to her 7-year-old. She's a mother. Happy Mother's Day, huh? She said, "Hey, Ben Shapiro, this is what real journalism looks like outside of your slanted Fox News. You sound whinier than my 7-year-old when I tell him he can't have another piece of candy." And so she's going after Fox News, which is like one of the halfway decent mainstream news outlets, as opposed to CNN and MSNBC and all these other ridiculous stations that hate Trump, have total Trump derangement syndrome. So that's that. This woman imagine being her 7-year-old, and this woman is so nasty. And let me move on to what she's gone viral for. This woman must be like an evil genius, or else she knows she has an excellent, by excellent I mean evilly excellent, PR person, because she starts all these trends. I think she was instrumental in trending the hashtag Me Too movement, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. But she was the one who said, "I'm a nasty woman." She might have been. And she's an actress. Alyssa Milano is an actress. She was in Who's the Boss? She was the one of the daughter in Who's the Boss, that sitcom. And then she was in this witch TV show, Charmed, way back like 20 years ago, up to 15 years ago, or 14, 13. But she's just unmasked herself as being ridiculously evil, anti-Trump, pro-abortion, pro-everything nasty. And I'm sure she's very nice to the people who agree with her, but oh yeah, that's Ashley Judd. Same thing, right? You're right. Thank you, guys. So she starts this tweet. Look, show this one. "Our reproductive rights are being erased." And she's referring to, I guess, one of those barbaric states' laws. "Until women, so-called barbaric, until women have legal control over our own bodies, we just cannot risk pregnancy. Join me by not having sex until we get our bodily autonomy back. I'm calling for a hashtag sex strike. Pass it on." And so she has this logo with a pink X over it, and it says hashtag sex strike. If our choices are denied, so are yours. And this is referring to the women who apparently have sex out of wedlock with these people. And so this woman is so nasty that she thinks that she's going to punish all the men who want to have sex with her, supposedly. I don't know who would. She's 46 years old, has 2 kids, is married. And so she's going to stop having sex with her husband? Good. They're doing us a favor. We don't need to be having sex with women, especially not liberal women who believe in abortion. She's helping us. We shouldn't be having sex out of wedlock anyways. So thank you, that's fine. Ridiculous. But she's really evil. She promotes abortion like no other. And I know that I have some listeners who support abortion, think it's a woman's choice over her own body. but they're killing people that are not their bodies, and their bodies are not their own. The Bible says your body is not your own. You were bought at a price, blah, blah, blah. So, I don't understand how people think that they're Christians. There's a lot of Christians who are liberals. I talked about one of them who died kind of unexpectedly recently, Rachel Held Evans, who refused repeatedly to come on to the Jesse Lee Peterson show. So, nasty. So, all right. I want to talk a little bit about these blacks, but I want to get to some calls. And I want to read a couple of super chats. Nicholas Stewart, thank you, guys. Thank you for the double super chats. And by the way, shout out to DLive.tv and Periscope and Facebook. I appreciate you guys for joining in. But let me just double check DLive because you guys give ice cream, diamonds, lemons, ninjagini, and sometimes even ninjets. And so shout out to Super Dave. Thank you, Super Dave. Let me see if I can make you a moderator. Super Dave, set moderator. Thank you, Super Dave. You are an excellent super fan of the Jesse Lee Peterson show and of my show. I definitely appreciate it. And thank you, Gift to Be number one for the DLive stuff. DLive is an excellent little platform. Not little, but it's growing. Excellent growing kind of startup platform. And they have this thing where you give lino. And lino, you use lino to give lemons, ice cream. And lemons is 1 lino. Ice cream is 10 linos. Diamonds is like 100. Ninjagini is like 1,000. And ninjets are 10,000. Something like that. And lino is kind of like cryptocurrency. It's kind of like Bitcoin type stuff. It's money. And DLive doesn't tax you, meaning it doesn't take a percentage of the lino that is donated to you. So thank you, guys. I appreciate that. So let me get to Robert out of Augusta, Georgia. Robert, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
So I wanted to ask, I listen to, the Hake Report a lot, and I noticed you kind of use terminology from 4chan, or at least where I've seen it. Do you ever frequent 4chan?
No, I sometimes try. It's been several months since I've tried because I work a lot, and then I try to go onto these alternative platforms, Gab and Minds. I'm horrible about keeping up with Facebook even. And even like YouTube comments I fall behind on. But I've gone on a little bit of 4chan. But 4chan, they have spread their stuff so that normies like me can get to familiar with some of their terms.
And then I do frequent 4chan a lot, but I'm not into the whole Jew hatred thing.
Mm-hmm.
I do have family who, they literally were Nazis back in the day.
Wow.
And growing up, I was always the reason why the Nazis lost and, all that stuff is because they hated. And that's become so apparent by listening to yours and Jesse's show.
That's interesting.
It's the hatred that was the downfall of them. And
yeah.
So I know that all the whites nowadays that blame the Jews for all of their problems, that hate is just going to utterly destroy them. It's going to blind them.
Yeah.
When you were growing up, was there that Jewish hatred among your peers?
Not among my peers, no. I wasn't aware of it until really the election, the campaign when it was Ted Cruz versus Donald Trump during the primaries, before the primaries really came, is when I became aware of the so-called alt-right. And I was alt-right friendly at the time, and I still am alt-right friendly. But there were all these Ted Cruz people, and the Ted Cruz people were nasty, attacking the Donald Trump fans. And I was like, I liked Ted Cruz a few years ago, but looking at him go against Donald Trump on that first debate, it was night and day. Donald Trump versus the rest of those fake politicians. And I don't mean that to be mean to Ted Cruz. I still like him. I just see that he's not as genuine and solid and unshakable as Donald Trump. He's still even slightly kind of politically correct. Unlike Donald Trump has a little bit of political correctness, but I just see Donald Trump as just night and day, real versus fake. And I said this to those people, and they're like, "No, you're not." They accused me of lying, and they talked about the alt-right, how the alt-right hates Jews and they're racist. I'm like, racism isn't even real. But that's when I really first became aware of the people blaming Jews for, the degradation of society, where I don't see them being balanced. I don't see them really looking at them. I think the number one issue is, one, that you're right that they're angry, and number two, by far, is that they're not looking at themselves. And just like Ben Shapiro started wanting to accuse this guy, this interviewer who was just asking him basically oppositional questions, but this didn't even sound like this guy necessarily even believed that those laws were truly barbaric, but he was just presenting the other side's view. But anyways, I think that's the mistake that they make, is one, they're mad about it. Two, which blinds you. And then two, they're not looking at themselves, which is how can you look at yourself if you're mad? But they're on a trip because they've gained this knowledge which puffs up, and they have no love, and so love builds up, right? Anger puffs up. Knowledge puffs up, and so they have this knowledge, and they're looking down on everybody else, and they're setting up these self-fulfilling prophecies where, oh, we get shut down every time we talk about this stuff. Oh, and they imagine in their mind that everybody else is being controlled, when they don't realize that they're being controlled by hating the Jews.
Yeah, I agree.
In fact, they're working for the same side of evil that they're mad about. And it's so laughable too, by the way. People who hate Ben Shapiro and people who hate Jews in general, they say, oh, they outright deny Christ. Well, that's really laughable, because even worse are the people who claim Christ's name as Christians and still sin. That's putting a worse name on Jesus than the people who have this written book that says nasty things about Jesus. It's worse to pretend to be a Christian and still be sinning and setting a bad example and hating and all that, and hoity-toity, prideful, arrogant, knocking everybody else who doesn't agree with you. That's worse than the people that you're hating, because you're turning more people away from Christ by pretending that you're with Christ. Anyways.
Very interesting, but that's all I wanted to talk about. And
so your family was from Germany?
Well, my father is American, and my mother was German-born. Her grandmother was an Aryan, and my great-grandfather on my German side of the family, he was a Nazi.
Yeah.
I met my Oma, which is Grandma, Oma Muika. I met her once, but she passed away. And I was young at the time, so I didn't really get to ask her, hey, what was it like in Nazi Germany,
Yeah. Well, there's evil everywhere, and nowadays, people who, if you hate evil, you're gonna be overcome by it. Is what I've noticed.
You literally become what you hate.
Yeah.
I truly believe that.
All right, Robert. Nice talking with you.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Skip out of Augusta, Georgia. Another Augusta, Georgia caller. How are you doing, Skip?
Hey, James, how you doing?
Doing fine, thank you.
Looks like Augusta's representing today, don't it?
Say that again?
I said, it looks like Augusta is representing today, don't it?
Oh, yeah.
All back to back.
Yep.
Look at here, this Ben Shapiro interview, it really made Ben look bad because the guy that was doing the interview, and I watched it 3 or 4 times to try to see anything different, and I saw the same thing every time. The guy only quoted out of Ben's books. He didn't give his opinion. He just quoted what Ben had put down in writing. And Ben just got so upset and couldn't defend himself that he ran. I wish there would have been a chicken song played for him.
The guy was very classy in the way that he handled Ben, even when he was leaving. That's one thing one thing that I really respect about. What
Ben rant and rave.
Yeah, one thing I really respect about how these guys, like the culture of the media over there is, that what I've heard is that if you're a journalist and you ask a bunch of softball questions, you get laughed out of town. You get mocked, you get attacked, which I really like. I wish that culture would come into America. The liberal media would be a lot better if they tried to actually not caricature the right side, but actually take it seriously and ask the left the questions that the right would want them to be asked. Because that's what that supposedly conservative man was asking Ben, leftist questions. So I would want to see right-wing questions asked of leftists. I appreciate it,
Exactly.
Skip.
Huh?
I said I appreciate it, Skip. Nice to hear from you.
Good to hear from you too, James. Can I give a shout out real quick?
Go for it.
All right, Fawnteach, Fawntech. I just want to give her a shout out and thank her. Okay.
All right.
All right. Thanks, James. Have a good day.
All right, you too, Skip. Take care.
All right.
Bye. The rest of the callers, I'm going to get to you, but let me read a few super chats. D. Martin III, I think your name is David or Daniel or something. You apparently still haven't figured out how to super chat and chat, but I appreciate the super chat donation. Constantine Klippa, why do women control men with sex? I think it's okay. My answer is there is soft evil and there is hard evil, and sometimes women try to be hard, like they try to be violent and stuff, and they do get violent and stuff like that. And then there's this soft evil, which is this wannabe, nice, fake, manipulative type of thing, and that's what, like, withholding sex in order to get your way is one of the ways that women do that. I hear. Never happened to me, but yeah, it's just they're itching for control is my take. But this liberalism, like say the Nazi Germany, the way that it's been portrayed has been like hard evil, and the communist killings of everybody, just openly hard evil. And then there's the soft evil, which is really the same thing. Abortion, because it's out of sight, out of mind, they act like it's not the same thing. They act like it's not murder, but it is. It's a mass murder, and 60 million plus and counting since 1973. And soft evil, yeah, it masquerades as good. Soft evil is what we see with this love is love, the LGBTQIA plus stuff, feminism, femininity, all that stuff is soft evil, and it is really and look, oppression, soft oppression. We have these illegals pouring in decade after decade, a century strong, probably, really. And they've been brainwashed to hate America, especially whites, and hate freedom, don't believe in the Constitution, don't believe in free speech, don't believe in gun rights, think that whites are genociders and stuff like that. hate our historical figures who were better men than like probably all of us. All that stuff is like what I call kind of soft evil, because it's you call it evil, and it may be like, what? How is that evil? How are you going to compare the LGBTQ people to Nazis? Well, they're evil, and they when it comes down to it, they're really angry people. They go after the conservatives, the Christians, the whites, the men, and this Alyssa Milano, although she's openly evil towards us, she's soft evil because she's pretending to be the friend of women and stuff like that. So that's my take about this women trying to control men with sex and stuff. Steven Gitano says, don't be a black blamer. Shh. And then he said, face palm, shaking my head. And then he says, Ben Shapiro is a warmonger. If he won't enlist, then shut up. Whoa. I don't know. Whatever. Yeah, I'm not for... I'm not particularly for these wars. I think that Trump has the right idea in that he's not for all this war stuff and jumping into meddling and all that mess. So that's fine, whatever. That may be a fair criticism. Okay, so when I say these blacks are out of control, I'm not black blaming. Just so you know, Steven, I don't know if you're referring to that. But let me get to these clips real quick, and then I will get to your calls. I appreciate it. 888-775-3773. I'm pointing to empty space, but that's all right. So let me tell you guys, we covered a few stories on the Jesse Lee Peterson show. I'm going to cover them very briefly to you. Okay, so you may remember this story. There's a silent clip that you can play of those blacks going, it is clip 3-3. These blacks harassing, taking the hats off of these Koreans. And this is in D.C. I found out, according to the Daily Caller. This happened in Washington, D.C. You see these blacks stomping on the hats, taking them right off their heads, and just intimidating and harassing and being like, oh. And one of them is a rapper. I forget his rap name, but he tweeted it out and said something to the effect of, not here, buddy. And so, like, you're not going to wear these white supremacist hats, Make America Great Again, MAGA hats, in my town. And so he takes them off and then whatever. So it turns out, according to the Daily Caller and according to Christian Freedom International, I have the link in the description if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. The two of these people, one of the guys whose hat was taken off his head, was a North Korean defector. North Korean. And that means that North Korea is where Kim Jong-un, Little Rocket Man, is from, who's firing off rockets again, by the way. He's all emboldened by Putin, apparently. Hates Trump again, but Trump still has it under control. But Little Rocket Man really oppresses. That's maybe hard oppression, hard evil. Little Rocket Man oppresses his people, where like they are brainwashed to think that he's a god and doesn't even go to the bathroom and all kinds of crazy stuff. They're not allowed to enter or leave the country. I think his brother or his stepbrother or his cousin, I think it was his brother though, left the country to go to Disneyland or something or visit China or both. And then he was killed. He was assassinated by female assassins in an airport who put like poison, if I'm not mistaken, like a poisoned, poisoned cloth over his face. And it was like, I don't know what it was, sarin gas, some type of thing that killed him. Assassinated. And he allegedly he killed his uncle, sick dogs on him, and crazy things. Some of the stories may not be true, I don't know. But he apparently, according to this Christian Freedom International, he left the country, and don't ask me why or what the backstory is, but his wife and like 3-year-old son and 7-year-old daughter or something like wife and children were either executed or put in a concentration camp after he defected. Defected means, I guess, he snuck out of the country because there's no leaving. And it's very, very tough to get in they let Dennis Rodman in, but I don't know. So yeah, these blacks are talk about ignorant, right? They falsely think that MAGA, Make America Great Again, is about white supremacy or racism or something, when MAGA is blacks' best friend. And then on top of that, they go after Koreans. They've gone after whites too, a lot. But they go after these Koreans, two of whom are North Koreans, who defected from the country, and they came to D.C. to like meet with, leaders and educate them, and be like, hey, help us, we're being oppressed, stuff like that. So they really see America as a place for freedom, but these blacks just don't see it that way. Let's talk about ignorant. So that's one example of blacks out of control. And it's just so common. And also, that's not, the Mexicans and Hispanics are not far behind. You saw them acting way worse than even these blacks did. At least these blacks didn't physically assault them. I mean, they did assault them in the sense that they got in their space and took off their hat and stomped on their hat. That's kind of an assault. But they weren't bleeding. In San Jose, after a MAGA rally, there were whites and others who were bleeding because the Hispanics over there's a whole lot of Hispanics up in San Jose, California, making them bleed, throwing eggs on white women who have MAGA hats or whatever. Just a mess. I talked about it a year or two or three or four, whatever, however long ago. And then where can we find the Ben Shapiro clip that you mentioned? It says Born Mature 1. Thank you for the super chat. You can find it, I don't know. I found it on Twitter. I found it from a guy that I follow who's a liberal, but he's pretty fair-minded. His name is Michael Tracy. Look for Michael Tracy on Twitter, and you may find it from him. So it's from BBC. Just search BBC Ben Shapiro. Google it. So anyways, that's one example. And then there's this fake N-word controversy. Oh my gosh. Should play this 10-2A. This black woman acts like, her struggle is being black in San Francisco.
I was born out of a struggle. That struggle is being black in the city and county of San Francisco as a public worker who works for the sheriff's department, who have been retaliated against, lied on, hostile work environment for the last 10 years. And I say, if you haven't found anything on me in 10 years, well, hell, you ain't gonna find nothing. I'm a good worker. I come to work.
I can't picture wanting to work with this woman. But yeah, that's that victim mentality. Yeah, and Joel says we're seeing it pretty clear. We're finding it now, this nasty black woman attitude. And so this other white woman, I put white in quotation marks, I don't know what she is, maybe Italian or whatever. This so-called civil rights lawyer who's a former supervisor in San Francisco who ran for mayor of San Francisco but lost. Alioto, that was Felicia Jones, by the way, one of these women that are going after this woman that you're about to hear. Here's this white woman kissing up to her, talking about some case where she said that that we came across this book way back in 2001 that was titled How to Kill an N, but she said the full-on N word, and this was like the 5th or 6th time of her saying it in this meeting, trying to like drive home the point of how ugly that word is. And then the blacks just finally react and shout her down and tell her to stop saying it. And PTSD, here, listen to this.
I won the largest race case in the nation in 2001 against Wonder Bread in the heart of San Francisco. I said to the HR lady on the stand, what was the name of the book you found in the cafeteria? In the heart of San Francisco. She said, How to Kill a Nigger.
Okay.
And I said, what'd you do with How to Kill a Nigger? When she told me the name of the book, I must have said it 100 times because they don't get it. They don't get it.
Stop, please.
Don't wait for
You never heard of PTSD with black folks?
I hear you.
Say it.
Okay.
Say it.
Okay.
Say it.
That is so funny to me. They said, do you ever hear of PTSD, which is post-traumatic slave disorder or something like that? What a mess. Really ridiculous. And so after this, the fallout, they want 3 black women, want her to step down or be outed, kicked out of the committee. This is like a committee, a Democrat committee in San Francisco. San Francisco is very liberal. And what else? Oh, her house got egged recently after this incident. And so that's just an example, man. Just overreaction, ridiculous overreaction to the N-word. The blacks get to say it all the time. When a white person says it, well, granted, she said it 6 times, but it's a tasteless, ugly word. I grant that. In certain contexts, you may be okay to say it, but generally, like, you shouldn't say it, right? But they want her out, which is ridiculous, and they egged her house, which is ridiculous. So, out of control. And then let me get to this Denny's employees. This happened over in, I think it happened in Atlanta area. This Denny's was shut down. Well, actually, it wasn't shut down. It probably should have been shut down. But it got a failing health grade by this inspection. Flies around, flying insects, raw eggs on sausage and bacon, something like that. And all kinds of mess. And this news crew walks in, and granted, it's not comfortable to be having a news crew walk in your face talking about this thing, but the blacks really handled it badly. Worse even than Ben Shapiro handled his interview. And so here's this black mother, Happy Mother's Day, in front of her kid, setting a great example.
It's not the treatment even a news crew would expect from a place that calls itself America's Diner. And here's one of their employees.
My son right here, if you film me with that camera, I'ma knock your ass out. And I promise you that my son right here, son, don't do that because I knock your ass out.
Hey, that's assault right there.
I don't give a my son right here, you.
Is that how you talk?
Joey.
Is that how you talk in front of your son?
If only their kitchen was as hot as the employees, perhaps none of this would have happened.
So that's an example of, it's just, I saw this headline on Drudge. 3 Denny's employees assault news crew over failing health grade. And I click on it, it sounds interesting. I'm like, wait a minute. This sounds like blacks. And isn't that a sad commentary that the first thing I think of is blacks, and sure enough, it's blacks. So there's like 3 employees who, one of them was flipping off the camera. And yeah, imagine Chinese restaurant staff doing that. Chinese people get like, the real Chinese food gets a B or a C, right? Because that's how you know it's real, as opposed to an A. The A grades are all just Americanized Chinese food. It's not as good. They get a B or a C if they're the real stuff. But this Denny's is American food. It's supposed to get an A, but they got a failing grade, and I don't know what that is. D, F? I don't know. I don't know how they were still open. They were considered to be open and full staff there. You saw like 5 or 6 employees there. Crazy. So it's just a sad commentary that that it's going to be blacks. Even okay, Hispanics are not far behind, but they act out. But I didn't realize that the blacks are even worse than the Hispanics, because I grew up among Hispanics and Asians, and there's a lot of Mexican gangs and stuff in my area, and we're like, oh, El Monte's the ghetto. But then you see these riots and just acting out. The blacks have them beat. They're just wild. They make the Mexicans look quiet. It's funny. It's crazy. It's not funny, it's sad, but it's a fact. And then last but not least, this talented 14-year-old football player who was featured in Sports Illustrated at age 13 got these college scholarships. His name was, I forget what his name was, but he was like a young, talented, hardworking black kid. Of course into sports, because that's where they're pushed into. But whatever, he's talented. That's nice. And then Jaylon McKenzie, thank you. And then, sure enough, he's at a party at 11:30 at night at age 14. and there's a fight breaks out, and he leaves. He's like, I can't be here. So the story goes. He shouldn't have been there in the first place, but he has the sense to leave, I guess, according to the story. And supposedly a stray bullet hits him. A bullet hit him regardless, killed him. And so here's that story briefly, just one clip.
A rising football star from the Metro East is shot and killed. Jalen McKenzie was just 14 years old, and in that time span, he already received national attention for his football skills.
Jalen McKenzie was killed Saturday night at a post-prom house party. We were told that a fight broke out, and Jalen walked outside to leave the party when a stray bullet hit him. Now the family is trying to honor what they call their trophy child.
Crazy, right? And they call him a trophy child. They have the pride in all the wrong things. Like, they don't... What's he doing at a post-prom party at age... He's an 8th grader. He's not even in high school yet. But he's, grown and built and everything. But... One, he shouldn't have been there. That's an example of being out of control. What is his parents thinking? And I think it's his mother, and I think it's a stepfather who is in charge. I don't think it's his real father. That's what I surmise based on what I've read about it, the situation. And then 2, of course, a fight breaks out, and of course there's a shooting at a prom party, 11:30 at night. Crazy. So those are just reminders of how bad it is. You don't really, the other so-called communities are getting worse. Whites are getting worse, and Mexicans and Asians, all getting worse, right? But you can't forget how bad this is, and I'm sure that the blacks seem to want to deny and distract and deflect and stuff like that, and I don't support that. Let's see. Jeremy out of Ohio, how you doing?
Good, and yourself?
Fine, thank you.
I just want to ask a question. I actually have another question, but I asked my first question first.
Cool.
I agree that we should, as blacks, we shouldn't worry about what goes on in the white community.
Well, I think that I don't totally agree with that, but go on.
But I'm as far as you guys say, like, when you guys say something that goes on, and as we deflect to say, well, what about white people?
Yeah, there you go.
So we shouldn't do that. Why should it be right for whites to worry about what goes on in our community?
Because it's not about race. It's really about right and wrong. And whites, when you criticize whites, I did see that, by the way. I did see a little bit of what you're talking about. But when I point out how bad the blacks are, I'm not pointing it out to deflect from what evil whites do. In fact, it reflects badly on whites that blacks have gotten so out of control because there's more whites, and yet the whites are silent about how bad the blacks are. You know what I mean? And if whites were not so silent, then blacks would maybe have more people, in whites or whatever, speaking up about how bad it is to wake them up. If somebody doesn't, sometimes people don't really self-reflect, and it takes somebody calling them out, and it's uncomfortable to be called out for being wrong. But whites are not serving that role when they should. And so, but I have seen what you're talking about, where whites act just like the blacks. And I saw it, I'll tell you, at this synagogue shooting down in San Diego a few weeks ago. I covered it. And sure enough, these whites are saying, since this time, blacks have committed a bunch of mass shootings, and they're referring to like mass gang shootings, just to clarify. But they're committed more mass shootings, and the media hasn't talked about it. Okay, that's fine, but we're still saying that this synagogue shooting is an example of whites going too nuts with this anger thing. And it's cropping up, and then whites want to point to blacks and saying, oh, at least we're not as bad as the blacks. That's a low standard, saying, oh, at least we're not as bad as the blacks. And the standard should be on what's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be easier, instead of saying whites and saying blacks, wouldn't it just be easier to say Americans because we're all Americans?
No, because the reason is that there's this phenomenon of people identifying with race, one, And the people who identify the most with race are blacks. And that's undermines them further because then they don't identify with what's right. So that's one point. Do you understand what I'm saying with that?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
And then the other point is there's a phenomenon of culture. Blacks just have a different culture. Whites just have a different culture. And the white cultural weakness is different from the black cultural weakness. So, like, the white cultural weakness tends to be, oh, whites are nice. They're afraid. And then they build up their anger and don't say anything until they freak out and commit a mass shooting or, stuff like that. Whereas the black is outright anger and, the out of wedlock births are way more. And so there's different phenomena among the different communities. I call them communities, but among the different races. And so it's definitely useful to mention the race. And I think that it does get painful to people's pride because they get tempted to identify with the race rather than what's right, when they should just be acknowledging that this is a phenomenon of so much wrongdoing among the blacks. Know what I mean?
Yeah, but I guess my only issue would be is black. When you start to say that black isn't a real race because a lot of some white people are like I'm Caucasian, that's from the Caucasus Mountains, or like I'm Haitian. A lot of black. Where is the country black? There's no country black.
Yeah, I know, but
you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, but you'll notice you'll have to take that up with blacks who identify with blackness. You know what I mean? Because
but you say white too, like white.
Yeah.
There's no country white. There's
I know,
a lot
but
of different groups of people in one country, and we're supposed to be one nation, so we should just all be American.
Yeah, I would love that too. But there's just this. In the real world, you're hard pressed to convince everybody else that we're gonna stop saying blacks and whites. You're fighting an uphill kind of losing battle, I'm not the only person. If it was just me, you might be able to convince me, but the whole rest of the world is saying blacks, whites. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but guess what, Hake? We got to start somewhere, and if we all just keep doing the same thing, it's dumb, and we're just dumb as them.
No, let me explain too, because changing the lingo that you use, like saying, "Oh, there's only one race, the human race," which I haven't heard you say that, but there's a lot of people saying that, and that's like your language itself. Changing language itself is not going to change hearts. The hearts are evil, and so it doesn't matter what you call them. You could, there could be somebody, back in the old times, they used Negro and stuff like that. But now they've changed that word because it's not politically correct, yet the race relations are arguably worse today, even though we're being more politically correct.
Yeah, but sometimes being politically correct isn't always the right thing because you'll get farther into the black instead of coming into the light.
I'm not sure what you mean.
I mean, like, if we continue to be politically correct just to keep people's feelings from being unhurt.
Yeah.
That don't necessarily always fix the issue.
Right. I'm arguing against
where they're coming from. That could be emotional to them, and then when they hear you say "the blacks" after every little segment you do, that may make them more angry, and then you're not going to be able to help them while you're making them more angry.
But you know what? Like, I can't really help them because that's their problem to be angry. I'm not saying, when I say the blacks, I'm referring to the out of control blacks. But then I'm not referring to, when you say the blacks or the whites or something, you're speaking in general terms. And you're talking about an issue that's prominent among the blacks or among the whites. So it's these people are just they're mad anyways. It's kind of like they're not going to hear anyways because they're angry. They're not looking at themselves. There's people that are Jew blamers, whites, who you tell them don't be angry, and then all of a sudden they think that you're siding with the Jews because they hate the Jews, and so you're telling them not to be angry at the Jews or not to hate them, and all of a sudden they think you're working for the Jews. They're just conspiracy theorists. They're just angry conspiracy theorists who refuse to look at themselves and check themselves. They'd rather accuse and falsely accuse and make up stuff about your own intentions. So it is with the blacks. When I say the blacks, I'm not saying it maliciously. I'm just referring to this problem among the blacks.
Yeah, I understand. I don't think you need to be malicious, but not everybody might take it that way. You feel what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
And you got to understand when you say be blacks, not all black people are the same. There's different nationalities of black people. So you wouldn't want to be grouped with a bad group of white people just because you have the same color skin.
I didn't group everybody together.
Yeah, but when you say be black,
right, that means generally.
Black,
when you say the blacks, that doesn't mean all.
I guess that's just kind of how it sounds, but that's all I want.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people make that false assumption because it's crazy. Anyways, Jeremy, nice to hear from you, man. How'd you hear about us?
Have a blessed day. I watched Jesse Peterson.
Nice. You called into his show before?
No, I listened to it on the podcast.
Okay.
After 12, when they upload it, I like to listen to it. I'm off on Sunday, so I figured I'd catch your show.
You catch Church? Do you hear Church with Jesse Lee Peterson too?
No, I haven't watched that yet.
Okay, well, his Church with Jesse Lee Peterson comes on basically in an hour from now at 11 a.m. Pacific time, which is 1 Central, 2 Eastern. So check it out. It's at Bond Rebuilding the Man YouTube channel.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Take care. All right, let's see. Robert out of Kansas, how you doing?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, man. I'm doing good. How are you?
Fine. Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, man, it is. Good to talk to you. We were talking about Nazis earlier, and I've, you get taught what you're taught in school, but then I've gone back and done some research on certain things that I learned, and one of the things I looked at was the book burnings, and people think that for some reason the Nazis were just going around burning these books, but what they were actually burning was with all the books in the Institute of Sexual Science in Berlin is primarily what they burned.
So it's like corrupt. It was corrupt books.
Well, the books that
Institute
said men
of
can be
Sexual Science.
women can be men. Pedophilia is a sexual orientation. Homosexuals can get married. All the things that we're dealing with now, that's what they were burning. They were burning all the things that were perverted, basically, all the perverts that had gotten control of their universities and their government.
But I've heard that there were homosexuals even among the Nazis.
Well, I've heard a lot of things about the Nazis that I don't know if all of it is actually true. I think.
That's why I'm not that into history, because I mean it's interesting for sure, but I don't really.
Nazis, I don't know.
I take it all with a grain of salt. Like it's hard to know what's really true, what really went down. And it's much easier, in my opinion, to look at today, present day reality, and judge the present times, because that's much more, you can see it for yourself. Whereas you have to rely on something somebody else wrote, which could be made up, could be real, could be anything. And so, and there is a whole lot of like political correctness around these stories that is really ridiculous. I went crazy. One thing that drove me crazy was when Mark Zuckerberg said that all the people who question the Holocaust or something like that aren't purposely trying to maliciously bring fake news or whatever. And there was a big controversy about that, whereas there's all of history is basically up for questioning, and so it was really ridiculous how people fight over history, and they act like it's so important, but present day is more important. And then people seek truth, they seek outside knowledge, but then they're not looking at themselves. And I think that's the number one mistake that even the alt-right makes, in that like they're seeking all this truth and information. They find out they've been lied to about a lot of stuff, and they find stuff that's true that or that may be true that a lot of the other people don't really realize. They find out that people who were demonized were not as bad as they were portrayed, and people that were acted like they were such victims were not such victims. But you have to look at yourself first, and I think that's one thing that Jesse brings that is a total solution for turning things around.
I agree, Hake. And, you know, you were talking about people in history. We look at Winston Churchill like he was a hero. That's what we're taught. But look at England today. You know, Middle England looks like the Middle East.
Yeah, it's a shame.
I mean, they destroyed that country.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like you say, look at what's going on now. People say the Nazis are in charge. So the Nazis are the ones promoting hate against the whites?
Right.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
The Nazis are not in charge. It doesn't make any sense. They lost the war.
Right.
And
the communists are in charge. I appreciate it, Robert.
The communists, yes, sir. All right. Hey, you have a good one.
All right, you too. Let me get to Mark real fast. Mark, you have less than 30 seconds, real fast.
Hey, James. So I just think it's funny that the LGBTQ people use the word pride to represent their group, and pride is one of the deadly sins, right?
That's a good point. Yep.
Isn't that funny?
Nice to hear from you, man. I appreciate you calling and hanging on there.
Oh, no, yeah, I love your show.
Cool. All right, take care, guys. Take care, Mark. Giovanni A., happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there, fams. God bless you and your family. Scott Matthew says, no isms. Constantine Klippa says, Facebook turning into the mark of the beast. Bridgeboy TV, I want to become a Christian. What are the literal steps I must take to do this? Catch Church with Jesse Lee Peterson. Rebuildingtheman.com/church. Rebuildingtheman.com/church. Subscribe to Bond Rebuilding the Man on YouTube and Facebook. It's cool. Like it. Thanks, guys.